All right, so last class for uh, 166, I created a HTML site. Was it in here or was it in Git review? I think I put it in Git review. Yeah, local one. So let's open that, check it out. Actually, let me just double click this. I need to. What was this one? Ah, this is what we were working on. Okay, so I did some stuff after class. I created a books API. Let's try testing out my books API right now. If you go to lapcbooks.herokuapp.com, you should get a list of some random books. So if you type that in, or just click on that link, you should see just a bunch of text here. Now, if you're familiar with JavaScript or JSON data, you'll recognize this. If you know JavaScript, you know that arrays start with the square brackets, right? So we're gonna have to do some JavaScript review. So in JavaScript, you have different data types. You have like a regular string. So I could say let person equal Bob. Okay, that's a string. So if I type person, get Bob, just a string. If I wanted an array like multiple people, I could say let people equal, and then I would have to put it in these square brackets. Let me zoom in so you could see that. So let people equal, I would put square brackets, and I can name multiple people like Bob, Sally, and George. And notice how gotta make sure they're in quotes because these are strings, they're not like variables. Um, so people now is Bob, Sally, and George. So if you see this here, then you see that this is an array. So I've got multiple things in here, and they should be all comma separated. It's just really hard to read like this. If I maybe copy all of this and create a new file. Actually, let's what's this? What am I looking at here? Local one. Ah, okay. What branch am I on? Okay, let's ignore that and close that and open this. Wait, nope, that's not what I want. Huh. Anyways, I'm gonna create a new file. Call it sample.json because this is JSON data, and hopefully VS Code will reformat it so it makes more sense. Yeah. So there you go. That bunch of gibberish that you see when you click that link, all this stuff, if you format it nicely, make it more readable, it's gonna look like this. So it's an array. Okay, you know it's an array because there's curly square brackets on the outside. So this whole thing is one array, and inside the array we have multiple objects. Each object is inside these curly brackets, and each object has an author, an ID, a title, a publisher, and a publisher date. Okay, so this is an example of JSON data. JSON data is basically a format for storing data that looks like JavaScript objects. We have the object with properties and their values. Okay. Um, the difference between JSON and actual JavaScript objects is these the keys, or the what do you call it, like the author ID. These are all in quotes. Regular JavaScript object, they would not be in quotes. Here they are. And also you can't use single quotes in here. You have to use double quotes only in JSON. But other than that, it's pretty much just a JavaScript object. So it's a way to store data. So I have all this data stored somewhere on a database, a bunch of authors and stuff. And um, when you send a GET request to that link that I gave you, it sends you back all that information. Okay. Um, so the way that works, how you first create a database, how you connect to it, how you get send requests to it, and all that. It's a pretty complicated process, right? But I'm gonna try to go over some of the steps with you guys because it's a really powerful tool that is available to you. So let me start by gonna go back to the file that I shared with you guys on the Git repo. It's uh, it was this, but I made some changes to it. I need to go back to the original. I think I just have the wrong folder open. I have two of them here. I've got one that you should be more familiar with. This is the one I gave you, and then there's that other one with the local one, and this one looks different. I'm gonna show you how I went from this to having something like this one, or not that one, the other one, where I've included a little form on the side. I didn't really style it nicely, I didn't have time, but you can see here there's a, a place for book title, authors, publisher, and publish date. So let's just write something silly in here that is going to be easy to spot. um, so if you go to that LAPC Roku app list here, you got a bunch of books here. Um, but let's try to add one to this and see if it works. So let's say book title is, do we have Cat in the Hat in here anywhere? Probably not, right? Jack and the Beanstalk. Um, Harry Potter, and some Bernstein Bears, and this will be easier to read again if I just look at it in VS Code. Let me open VS Code back up. Okay, so here we could see the titles. So Jack and the Beanstalk, Harry Potter, Test from Postman, Test, Hello, Journey to the Center of the Earth. Just random stuff there, but let's try adding a new one through here. Let's say the cat in the hat by Dr. Seuss. Publisher, I don't know. Publish date, let's just put today. And submit. It doesn't look like anything happened, but if I inspect, go to console, we could see success loading books and some other stuff happened here. We sent that information that I just submitted. It should have gone to here. So if I refresh this, this should grow bigger. There we go. See, the last one here is Dr. Seuss. So if I copy all this and paste it in here, be easier to read. We should have Dr. Seuss in there. So that's called a fetch request. Or sorry, yeah, it's a fetch request. And it works like this. I've got this JavaScript here. I've got two different fetch requests actually, but the one that we're concerned with right now is this one. So I've created a form in my index file. Where's the form? Right here. So this form, I gave it an ID and stuff, so in JavaScript I'll be able to target it and everything. But you can see here it's got a bunch of different inputs. Those are the inputs that you see up there. The book title, authors, publisher, and the publish date. That's all here. So it's just an input type text. ID is book title, placeholder, book title. So you know what to type in there. And then one for author, publisher, and publish date. So just inputs. And the last one is an input type submit. Just a button that you can click to submit. So it's important that this isn't a form, because when you have an input type submit on a form, it does a form submit. So it's just an action that happens, a form submission. So the input type submit, when you click on it, it triggers a form submission, and this form gets submitted. But in my JavaScript, all the way down here, I do all the, grabbing all of the elements, like title equals, get element by ID book title, author equals get element by ID author, and so on. Just grabbing all of those elements, okay? But I'm grabbing it as soon as I submit the form. So um I've set form equal to get element by ID new book. I gave that ID to the form, so I can target it. And then I said form dot add event listener submit, so listens for a submission of that form. E dot prevent default, that just prevents the default action when you submit a form, which is the page refreshing. So that just stops the page from refreshing. And then the rest of this is grabbing all of those values of those input forms. So whatever you type in is the value of that form. And then I create something called a request body, because I need to package all that stuff that I get, whatever it's typed into the book title, author, publisher, publish date. I take all of that and I create this object out of it. This object looks like this. It has a title, which is the title. It has authors, which is the authors, publisher, which is the publisher. Again, this is just an object with properties, title, author, publisher, publish date, and the values for those are set to whatever's inside the form whenever it's submitted. So whatever you typed into the input. Okay. So it creates an object with that. And then it does what's called a fetch request. So I fetch and I go to that link, that same link that I gave you, except when you type that link into your browser, you're basically sending an HTTP request, and HTTP requests have like a method. Okay, there's different methods you can use when you're submitting an HTTP request. The default, whenever you type it in a browser, is going to be it's called a GET request, because you're just getting whatever you're typing in there. So if I type this, I'm just getting some stuff back. Okay, and if you click, see, click network, inspect, and then do a click on the network tab here and refresh. You'll see here it says books here. If you click on headers, um, tells you here request method get. Okay, so anytime you visit a website, you're doing a get request. Okay, that's just the default. But if you want to do something like interact with the database, like where I'm getting this from, um, I've created an interface where if I send a post request instead of a get request, I can add stuff to that database. Okay, so here when I do this fetch, I set the method to post instead of get, and this other stuff, headers, this is just some required stuff that we need to include there. Don't worry about that right now. But you can see here body. So whenever you do a fetch request, you can send a body along with the request. And in this case, the body is this object that I created out of all of these inputs. Okay, it says request body. It's this object. And so I'm sending that body along with the fetch request. So I'm sending that request body. I'm also doing something called json.stringify in order to convert this to JSON instead of JavaScript object. Remember, the JSON object is the one that looks like this. It's got the quotes around. So this is not JavaScript, but this is JSON. So json.stringify just basically switches this regular JavaScript object to a JSON object. And then it sends it with this fetch request. Okay, then I just return the result in so whatever response I get after sending it there, that gets sent back to me, but we don't really need to worry about that. That's just something that shows up in the console, I think. um, yeah, I just console log all of that information, so I could pretty much leave this out to make this less confusing, even though it's already pretty confusing, but all that stuff I guess is unnecessary. It should still allow me to add a new book right now. Let's try. Um, I don't know any books. I'm not a book reader. Let's type E. I don't know. Lord of the Rings. Author. Something Tolkien. Publisher. I don't know. Published date. Let's say I don't know, August 17, 1987 or something. Just see if it'll accept it in this format. Submit it, and nothing's gonna change here, but let's go back to here and refresh, and there we could see something got added. Token, title, publisher, I don't know, published date 1987-08, and then we get like some timestamp. So it still works even though I deleted that last bit. So I'm just trying to say don't worry about that last part. We could ignore that, just focus on this here. I'll do this from the beginning, from scratch, so we could kind of, it'll make more sense maybe that way. And probably not a good idea to show you the backend, like how I created the database and this whole like how I know what content to send. All that stuff is going to be too confusing, I think. um uh, it's enough to just know how to send a fetch request, because most of the time, um, you're just going to be fetching data from existing databases out there. You're not going to have to create one yourself like I did. Uh, we could do more examples. Like if you go to sample API, I'm sure we could find some sample ones we can use. Okay, here's one for beers. Let's see available endpoints. How do we use this? So we just have to go to this address here, I think. Let me see. Paste. Yeah, so this gives us a list of beers. So if you type this, just another example of what an API is. It's just a link that you go to that sends you back a bunch of data. In this case, list of beers. Okay. And there's usually ways to interact with it and to send specific URLs. Like this is just a URL to /beers/ale. And I guess that gives you all the ales. But if we just go to /beers, we get nothing. Okay, so that one doesn't work. So you have to be familiar with the API and you have to read documentation usually how to use it. So here we see ale, stouts, and red ale are the available endpoints. That means I should be able to go to API /beers/ stale, or did I spell that wrong? Or stouts, stale. What was I thinking? Stouts. Okay, so it gives me a different list now. Let's see if there's a better one. Futurama. Okay. Okay, so there's Futurama is a cartoon if you're not familiar with, but this API is one that has like basically gives you information on the characters and cast and episodes. So to visit this, I think we just have to go to sampleapis.com/Futurama / one of these. So like characters, for example. Characters. Let me click on that and actually see what we have to type in. Let me do this in a separate tab again. So we have to go to APIs, sampleapis.com/Futurama /info or /characters. Gives us all the characters like Philip J. Fry. There's APIs for getting weather information. Let's see if there's another website out there. Sample API. Yeah, that one looks boring. Here's one. Okay, so fake data. So if we send a request to this one is kind of easier to use. I'll send you a link to this one. So what an API is, it's basically a URL that you send that gives you specific data back. So in this case, if I want to get from this, whatever fake API this is, if I want to get a list of users, then I send a request to API/users page equals 2. Actually, I don't know why it's giving me page equals 2, but that's another thing you can have in there. Like if you have multiple pages of data, you could say, well, only show me page 1 or page 2. If I type API/users, just get a list of all the users. Also, it tells you how to use it. You're not going to know how to use an API unless you read the documentation on how to use it. Okay. So in this case, if we want a single user, for example, we then have to go to API/users and then slash the user ID. In this case, it's going to give me user 2. Here's user 1, user 5. It's all different names. Okay. So depending on what you type in there, you'll get a different result back. Okay. So what I did is I created an API that lets you go to lapcherokuapps.com/books. You get a list of books, and if you type books slash one of these IDs, like ID 60, just a random uh, string of letters and numbers there, then you get specifically that book. Okay, so you can basically get all the books by just going to /books. You could get a specific book by typing in the book ID at the end. And if you do a get request instead of, if you do a post request instead of a get request, then you can also add to the list of books. You can also do delete requests and stuff to delete stuff out of there. But let's just try to focus on just the basics right now. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. I guess why is it called Application Programming Interface? Because you send a request and you send a URL to them, and that's the interface, I guess. Sending a URL lets you interact with the application. So in this case, it's a books application that lets you retrieve the books and update them and delete them. Okay. So why am I showing you all that? Because it might be like a new feature you add to your site. I made this change here. Don't save. I want to do a git branch. So earlier, I wanted to keep the master branch the way it was. I didn't want to add these changes to the master branch, so I created another branch called fetch feature. But I don't know what happened. I think I did something wrong, so it did override my master branch. Okay, check out fetch feature. Yeah, it's all still here. So I guess I'll have to just start with the other file. So I'm gonna leave this one alone. Switch to test repo. This one is the one that you guys have. I want to show you how I'm doing this. Code dot. So here's the regular file that you guys have. And it looks like this. Right, everyone has this, right? Story 1, story 2, story 3. Well, instead of these story 1, story 2, story 3, we could load in stories from a database. And the way that's going to work is, again, we're going to have to use JavaScript and use that fetch, built-in fetch command that's available here. So the way fetch works is, well, first of all, it's JavaScript, so you have to put it in a script tag. Okay. Now this is going to be super confusing if you never took JavaScript with me, but I think both of you, Dayun and Gail, you've taken my JavaScript class, right? Because if not, this might go way over your head. You guys both familiar with JavaScript, right? Okay. So the script tag is where you write your JavaScript. Like you could say let person equal Bob, and then console.log Bob, or sorry, person. A simple script like this. If you open it with the browser and go inspect, click on console, you should see Bob up there. Refresh the page, you'll see Bob again. Okay, every time you refresh, you'll see another Bob. Because every time I load the page, this script runs, creates a person, sets it equal to Bob, and then I console log it. Very basic JavaScript. Okay, but from that, we're gonna jump to some not so basic JavaScript. So we're gonna have to create a form to submit the data to. But before I do that, let me just give you a little glimpse of what that backend looks like, how it works. You don't have to understand any of this, but I'm going to show it to you just so you kind of have an idea of what's going on. It's not all magic happening. Let me go here, books backend. So this is a completely separate file called books backend. And in there I've got this LAPC books project. If we open with Visual Studio Code, I'll show you what the backend looks like. So the backend of a website is the part that you don't see, that the regular user doesn't really know it's there, or they don't, it doesn't show up on the web page or anything. It's basically something that your front end, or the site that you can see, connects to, sends requests to it, and then this thing does things for you. So in this case, I've got this first, the main important thing here is called app.js. And in app.js, I have a lot of stuff going on. I've got this express function, or express object, that I'm requiring, that I've installed with the Node package manager, which I guess I should start with the Node package manager as well. So Node is something that lets you use JavaScript in your terminal, and it lets you install a bunch of cool features. You get it by going to node.js.org or nodejs.org. You gotta download it. You usually get the LTS, or long-term support version of it. You download that and install it. Then that unlocks this feature. In your terminal, you're able to type in node, and then if you type in Node and it tells you welcome to Node.js version whatever, then you know you've got it installed. But if you type in Node and it says unknown command, then oops, I entered node mode. I need to quit, so Control C, exit out of there. So node command or node dash dash version, I guess, gives you the version number. So you can type that into your computer, see if you have Node. If not, then you should download and install it. So once you install Node, it comes with something called a Node Package Manager. And the Node Package Manager basically keeps track of all of the plugins and libraries or whatever your website requires to work, to function. It creates this package.json, and then it lists all those dependencies that you need to install for your website to work properly. So in this case, I've got 3 things that I've installed: .environment, Express, and something called Mongoose. .environment is just something that lets you create this .env file that lets you connect to a database. By the way, this is all like, it should be private, rest123, that's like my database password. And the database name, node test. Anyway, it's just a test database anyway, so I'm not worried about showing that to you guys. But that .environment file is for putting things like this that are supposed to be sensitive, that you don't want to share. You would place it in a .environment file, and then if you're using Git to push this to a repository, you would put that .environment file inside the git ignore file so that it doesn't get pushed, because there's sensitive information in there, like a password. So you create a separate file, .environment, and in order to create that separate file, you have to install something called .environment. And the way you install it is by typing in npm install and then .environment. Now, I've already got it installed, but it's gonna try to install it anyway. I usually get like some messages like here: found one high severity vulnerability. And it just tells you what to do: run npm audit fix. Like I would have no idea what to do about that, but it tells me right there. So I'll do npm audit fix to get rid of whatever vulnerability there is. Okay. Anyway, so you install packages with Node by typing in npm, which stands for Node Package Manager, and then you install whatever feature you want to be able to use. So in this case, .environment is just so I could create this .environment file. Then I have another one called Express. This is really important one for this. Express basically creates a server for you. You could create one without Express, but it would take more code. So Express just makes it easier. And then Mongoose is another one that I installed for connecting to the database. So all of those I installed by typing npm install Express, npm install Mongoose. Once you do that, it automatically gets added here. Okay, there's also stuff called dev dependencies. These are dependencies that you only need in the development environment, like for for testing and stuff. It's not required for the application to work once it's uploaded somewhere. But those will automatically go where they need to go. Actually, I don't think they'll go automatically. You have to specify. You have to say npm install -dev, and then the name of that, in this case, is nodemon, and that way it'll go under dev dependencies. Um, Again, this is all going to be very confusing for you, but let me just go like just overview of all of this so you kind of understand what's happening here. So that package.json, it gets created automatically once you install Node and once you run npm init. So go to any file or create any folder and then open the terminal in there. So git bash here. And if I type npm init, it's going to ask me a bunch of questions like package name. Just press enter, 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 enter for everything. And then you can see once I go through that, you can see it created that package.json for me. So we got our name, new folder, version, just a bunch of stuff it sets up for you by default. There's no packages here installed, but if I type npm install express, you'll see it'll start installing this. And then if we close this and open it again, we'll see dependencies express. So it automatically adds all that stuff for you. So you don't really have to know how to create it yourself. You can see all this other stuff gets added, like node modules. Node modules is where everything that I installed, like Express, and everything that it depends on, all of those things get downloaded into this folder. So eventually this folder gets really, really big, pretty big file size. So even just with that one thing installed in there, I guess it's not that big right now. It's only about 2 megabytes, but this node modules folder gets really big eventually. Okay. So that's important because when you're pushing to a Git repository, you don't want to push the entire node modules folder with all the dependencies and stuff in there because it's a really big file. It'll take forever to upload. So instead, what you do is you just push the package.json file and whatever dependencies there are in there. All you have to do is run npm install, and then they get installed automatically, right? So let's say I type in npm install, and let's do .env again. Okay, that should get added to my dependencies, right? Now, if I delete everything, including the node modules, and I just leave package.json, now if I do git bash here again, if I just type npm install, and I don't say express or .environment or anything, just npm install, it's going to look inside my package.json folder, look at my dependencies. It's going to see, oh, there's a .environment and express. It's going to say, oh, this project that you're working on requires these things to work. So npm install will just install all of them for me. Okay, so if I look back in there, now node modules is back and it installed all the dependencies that I needed. So that's what this package.json file is. It's just a little JSON file. Again, it's JSON object, JSON data with the looks like a JavaScript object, except there's quotes around the keys. So dependencies dot environment and then the version number express version number. So it's just objects. So that's what package.json is. You're gonna see that a lot in any node project. Of course, it's gonna be there. So going back to where was I? The LAPC books backend. I think it was this one. So here, that's why I've got this package.json. It's just my dependencies. So again, the ones that I have here are .environment, express, and mongoose. So um, so after installing all those packages, then I can start using them. So in app.js, that's where I actually use them. I had another file that had more comments on it. I don't know if what did I do with that one? Let me see if I could find it. It had some useful comments in there explaining everything. I think it was this one or this one. Okay, yeah, this one has all the comments. Let me just open this one with VS Code. Alright, so once all those packages are installed, then you can require them. You can say, so for example, to use Express, I say require Express. So what Express does, takes out a few lines of code for creating requests, for creating a server to listen for requests coming into a port. So what's a server? What's a request? Um, if I start the server by saying npm start, oops, never mind. That one's not gonna work right now because I probably changed a few things. But anyways, it's basically gonna create something that you can listen to. Like if I go to localhost 8000, that would be like a server that the port that that server is using to listen to. But that's basically a local version of lapc heroku app.books or slash books. So this is a server. It's listening for my requests, my get requests. So Express just creates that for you. So you say const express equals require express, and then const app equals express. This is just how you have to use it. I don't want to explain all the details of it because it's going to be really confusing. But so you create a server, and this books route, you create routes. So routes are like slash books colon book ID or slash book slash author or something. You make up those routes. You could decide what kind of routes you want to have. So the books route, I actually put that in a separate file to keep it clean. But here's what it looks like. If I go to JS, routes, and then books, this is what the routes actually look like. Again, it's using Express. There's a thing called a router, which whenever you go to like /, it says, okay, find all the books. Or if you go to / book ID, then it's gonna find book by ID or find by ID, request params book ID. Anyways, I should stop showing you this because it's more complicated than I remember. But anyways, that's the back end. It's just it's a place where I define what I like. Here's where I define what the information I'm gonna need. I'm gonna need a title, author, publisher, publish date. So that's how I know what to send whenever I'm doing the um the fetch request. And yeah, let's not look at the backend. The backend's too complicated. What you need to just worry about is the front end right now. So um, the front end is just the part that we can see. That's this stuff. And we just need to figure out what fetch request to send in order to get a list of books back. Okay. So again, the backend stuff, again, you don't have to know how it works. Most programmers or web developers don't really know what's going on in the backend. Whoever created the backend just tells them like how to use it. Just like if you go to these test APIs that I showed you, you don't have to know how the API was created. You just have to know how to interact with it, and then they tell you how to interact with it. Um, Sample API. So if you go to, where is the other one? Let's just go to this one. So you go to these, it tells you somewhere how to use it. So about docs, somewhere here it tells you how to use it, or you just look at these examples and figure it out. So like for the Futurama one, for example, it tells you available endpoints. But the other one was a little bit more simple. Sample API. This one. It tells you here what you have to request to get certain data back. So if I send a GET request to API/users question mark page equals 2, or let's do single user API/users/2, then it's going to give me user 2. So you could just click on it and it'll give you the link right there. But this same link, recres.in./API/users question mark page equals 2, the page you could leave out. But if you take that and wanted to do a fetch request through a website instead of actually typing it in yourself, you just have to do that fetch command. So you'd have to say, I don't know if I could do it through here, but basically fetch and then paste that in there. And then it would get you that data back. But there's more you have to do with it. You have to say dot then you have to get the result, and you have to say result.json in order to be able to read it. And then you have to console log it as well. But yeah, let's not do it through here. So going back to the test repo, let's start turning this into the other one with the requests. Or at least for the, I think it'll be easier if we start by replacing the stories with data that we fetch from lapcbooks.herokuapp.com/books. So we'll start by getting this information from here. um, and then using that to populate my stories. Right now, I don't have actual stories. I just have titles and authors and stuff. So that's what we're gonna see for now. But then later we'll add stories as well. Because here we don't have the actual story, just the author and stuff. So that's what we're gonna load in right now. So I'm gonna open this with Visual Studio Code. Oops. Make sure we're looking at the right thing here. Yes, we are. Okay, so let me check our Git status right now. Are we working with a Git repo? Say Git status. Okay, Git remote, get URL origin. Make sure I'm connected to the right place. Yes, I am. And Git branch. And we see we have one branch called master. Okay, so this is the master branch. The master branch at the moment is looking like this. But imagine this is a project that you're working on with a team and you're trying to add a new feature, which is this whole API thing that I'm talking about. You don't want to mess with the original branch. So what you do is, well, first let's see if we have any changes that need to be. Let's undo this change here. Discard change. This is back to just the way it is the way it was when I gave you this file, or I uploaded to my GitHub. So if you do a git clone from there right now, you'd get this exact file. Anyway, so because we're working on a new feature, we want to switch to a different branch. So we say git branch, and then make up a new branch name. So the main one is master, right? So we have a branch called master. That's the only one. It tells you right here you're on master. So if we say git branch and we say new feature, we created a new branch now. But if you type git branch, you'll see now there's a master branch and a new feature branch. So now we say git checkout. So if you want to switch from one branch to another, you say git checkout. Say new feature and then the name of the branch. So now I'm on new feature. I switched from the master branch to new feature. And just to see if this messes up the original branch, I'm going to add a new file. Just hello.txt. Say hello. Okay, so on new feature branch, I have a new file called hello.txt. Now let's do a git checkout and switch back to master. Okay, now I'm on the master branch. And it's still there. Why is it still there? Well, we could discard it, I guess. If I discarded it, go back to git checkout, new feature. Going back here. Oh, it's still gone. Okay, so if you do a checkout, I guess it's not gonna save anything unless you do a commit. So you gotta make sure you commit when you do something. So create a new file again, hello.txt, and then say git add, and then git commit -m added hello.txt. Okay. Now let's switch back to the master branch, git checkout. master. Okay, so now you can see back on the master branch, there's no hello.txt. But if I switch back to git checkout, new feature, it comes back. So that tells you that if you create separate branches and you commit to those branches, then you basically have, well, you have a new branch. So you can work on that new branch. You could add new features, change stuff, and it won't affect the other branch, the main master branch. So if you're gonna do something like add a new feature by changing a bunch of stuff, changing the CSS, adding new things to the HTML, and you don't want to mess up the main branch, then you need to do a git branch and then make up a new branch. So you just type git branch and then the name of the new branch. That creates a new branch, and git checkout plus the name of the branch switches to that branch. So that's what I've done here. I've created a new feature branch, I've switched to it, and I added a hello.txt, but I'm going to delete that. Instead, I'm going to modify our index file. So I'm going to modify this by adding a little section with the form. Actually, no, before we do that, let's just add the JavaScript. Let's not worry about the form yet, because once I add the form, I'm going to have to add a bunch of CSS and change a lot of stuff. So let's just add our script, which will go here in the bottom right before the closing body tag. And here I'll do a fetch request. So I'm just going to say fetch, and I want to fetch all our books. So I'll copy that and paste it in here. So again, what you need to know is how to use the fetch function. It's built in, so it's just you type in fetch and then parentheses, and then inside there what you want to fetch. In this case, I want to fetch the books. Okay. In JavaScript, there's something called asynchronous JavaScript code, where sometimes you send a request and it takes time, and with normal JavaScript, things happen instantly usually, or they happen one after another, depending on which line. So one line executes, then another line, then another line. But sometimes things take time, like fetching something from an outside API. So doing this fetch request takes time because I have to go out and go on the internet and then search for this, right? So because it takes time, there's a way to wait for that to finish before you move on to the next step. And that's by using this dot then. Okay. Dot then waits until this completes. Okay, once this completes, it gives you something called a result. Okay, so once you do a fetch, it gives you a result which you pass into the then, and then you do something with it. You say result, pass it into this function. Let me let's push this on the next line so it makes more sense. So you do a fetch, then you take the result, okay, and then you say result.json, because what you're fetching from there, you need to convert to JSON data. This is just something that you have to do. Don't worry about why. Again, because this is all JSON data, right? It's like a JavaScript object with quotes around the keys. So this JSON is going to be involved with that. So we have to read that as JSON. Um, then you can console log it, I guess. So then whatever this gives you, which is just the data basically that's been converted to JSON, then you can say console.log the data. So if we did that correctly, we should, whenever we load this page, if I do inspect and do a console, we're doing it says fetch finished loading get LAPC Heroku, but it gives me undefined. So we did something wrong. It shouldn't say undefined. It should give me all these books as a result instead of undefined. So let me see what we missed. Do the fetch, then we take the result, result.json, then take the data. Oh, we need to return. Oops. This would work if it was all one line, if I just did this. If you remember from JavaScript, when you have arrow functions, if you write it like this, it automatically returns this. But if you have like the way it was like this with the parentheses, you have to say return, or else nothing happens with this. Okay, you have to return it so it moves on to the next then. Okay. Anyways, so that's just a minor detail. So if I refresh, now we get a list of authors and books titles. So we get all the books listed right here. Okay, so it's taking this and fetching it basically. I'm fetching it, and what's useful about this is now I could take all this information about these books that I just fetched, and I can try to use it somewhere in my page. Okay, because I've got them. Well, I haven't saved them yet, but I can save them. I can say instead of console logging it, we can save all of this by doing let's see, what would we do? We could say like let books, and then say instead of console log, or along with console logging it, I guess we can also and data console log, that should go there. Okay, so then I can say books equals data. Okay, so now if we look here, inspect console, so let's refresh, we get that data back. But if I type books, we can see books is now set to that data. So now my books are saved in this books variable. So I did a fetched from that link. Then I took the result and translated it as JSON, because that's what it is. It's not plain text, it's JSON object. So I'm translating it with result.json. Then after it translates, it gives me the translated data back. Then I console log that data and I save it in my books variable. Okay. Then what you can do is, I guess I would have to include this in another then, because all of this is taking time. We could say another then, and do a whole bunch of other stuff now. Actually, no, sorry, that's not gonna work. I guess setting books like this would be kind of pointless. I could just do it all in this then block here. Instead of saying books just equals data, I could just do something with that data. I can say document dot inner document dot body dot inner HTML equals data. And If I do that, then it should just replace everything in here with that data, except it just says object object everywhere. So we have to actually get pieces of the data out. So like, let's see, what does it give us? An array, right? It gives us an array of objects. So we could say data, like the first object, I want to get the title. Let's see, it should give us just one title, Jack and the Beanstalk. Say data one dot title, that'll give us the next title, Harry Potter and something. Get the next one, test from Postman. Anyway, you get the idea. So author, get like the fourth one, get undefined. I guess I don't have four, or sorry, I have authors, not author. This is author one, this is author two, right? So obviously we don't want to just replace the whole body with that. So instead, you might create a special div to hold all of this information. So like right now I've got these divs called story container that have an h2 with the story title, and then a div called class equals text with a bunch of this information. So I'm just gonna replace that with whatever I find with this fetch. So I can say, let's take the story container. I'm just gonna take everything from inside story, and let's see, story container. What's this closing? Oh, okay, so each of the stories has a story container. Then I'm just gonna delete all the stories then. It's okay because I have it saved. Remember, I have a master branch that has the original. This is all on a separate branch, so I'm just gonna delete everything inside stories section. Okay, and instead, we're gonna say, so for the data, because the data is an array, we can say data dot for each, and that just loops through each of the array items. Say for each book, I want to place the book information inside here somehow. But we gotta first create some HTML elements out of it. So for each book, let's say let element equal document dot create element. So for each one, I want to create like a div. Or let's call it let div equal document dot create element div. Let title equal, or call it h2 actually. Let h2 equal document dot create element h2. Let paragraph or p equal document dot create element paragraph. So I'm creating a div, I'm creating an h2, I'm creating a paragraph. The reason why I'm creating these is the div is just going to be the container for each book. Each book is going to be inside a div. Each book is going to have a h2 for the title, and then a paragraph for let's see, we have title, we have where is it? We have title, publisher, authors. So I'm just gonna make an element for each of those things. So the h2 for the title, paragraph for the authors. Let's make it a h3 for the authors. And then let p1 equal document dot create element paragraph, and then another one, we'll call it p2, also another paragraph. So this will be for the author, for the title, author, publisher, publisher date. Okay, so that's why I'm creating these elements here. So for each book, I'm going to create an element for all those things that are inside the book. And then I'm going to say, well, for the h2, I'm going to say h2.inner html, or I guess we say inner text, doesn't matter. h2.inner text is going to equal the book dot title. The h3.inner html or inner text is going to be book dot h2. The p1 dot inner html, book dot authors. Let me see if this is gonna work though. The authors is an array, so I don't know if I'll be able to do book dot authors that way. I'll just do it anyway. So p1 dot inner text equals book dot publisher, p2 dot inner html or inner text equals book dot publish date. Okay. So I'm fetching from LAPC books, then I'm returning the JSON data. So I'm translating that to JSON so I can read it in JavaScript. Then I'm taking that data, and then for each data is an array, because this is giving me an array, remember, the square brackets, bunch of objects in there. So for each of those objects, I'm calling each of them a book, just giving it a temporary name book, because that's what they are. Each object is a book. Then for each book, I'm creating all these elements. I'm setting the inner text for those elements. Then I need to place those elements inside the div element. So we could say div.append child h2, or just say h2. Div.append, I'm going to append all of them. So append child just says put this element inside that element, right? So I'm putting the h2, the h3, and the p1 and the p2, putting those all inside the div that I created first, putting those all inside. And then we can say, let's see, maybe I should have before I do the for each, I'll say let books equal just an empty array. And then for each book, I'll then add it to the books array. So I'll say books dot uh, push div. Okay, I think that should work. I'm not sure. So I created the elements, put something inside each element, put those elements inside the div, put that div inside an array called books. What else can we do here? So after this whole for each stuff, I'll say document, or let's say we need to get that, what is it called? The stories section. We need to add this inside there. So let me make it an ID equals stories. Actually, let's leave it as a class. I'll just add an add ID as well. ID equals stories. And then I'll say I guess somewhere here, it doesn't matter. I'll say let stories equal document dot get element by ID stories. Okay, so stories is going to be this section. So then I can say stories dot inner HTML equals books. I don't know if that's gonna work. Let's just try it. Just did a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, we're getting objects. I kind of figured this would happen because I'm pushing this whole array in there. So instead, let's say books dot for each book stories dot push, or sorry, stories dot append. I guess append child would work too. Append child book. Let's see if that works. Yep. Okay, so we get Jack and the Beanstalk, some authors by Penguin, Harry Potter, and something. So now I've got something that is I'm getting from outside from the internet. So all this stuff is getting loaded into here, and then we can also create a form here that we can use to update the list of books. So if we want to add a new book, we could do that, and then that new item will just show up here. So pretty cool. I'm glad I was able to finish that right now because I got lucky. I didn't mess up too much here. Anyway, so this is gonna bring you back to JavaScript class. So you're gonna have to remember a bunch of stuff you might have forgotten for this to all make sense. But all of this has been covered in JavaScript except for the fetch API itself and using the then. Okay, but creating the elements, setting the inner text, append child, all that should be familiar to you guys. The only thing is we're doing a fetch now. So again, the fetch, it's not too difficult to figure out and it's not too much code. It's only this much, which is very little compared to if you had to try to figure out how to do the whole backend stuff with Express and Mongoose and all that. You don't need to know all that. You just need to know how to interact with that backend. So the way you interact with it is using this fetch command, this fetch function. You fetch the data, In this case, I'm fetching from LAPC books, but I could easily switch this instead of getting all this stuff from my books API here. I could switch it to grab things from one of those sample APIs, right? I'll just have to switch the URL. Where's that recres? So like a single user or a single, say this one. So if I sent the request instead to here, then I would get a different, I'd get different stuff back out. In this case, I would get an object. So I would have to again modify, obviously all this stuff since I don't have a title and all that. I don't have a book.title, book.author, publisher, publish date. I would have to switch this to this actual info. Like I would have to get the data, ID, email, first name, last name. So I'd have to do something with that information. In this case, I'm getting book data, so that's why I'm accessing the book title, author, publisher, publish date. I'm accessing this stuff like author, publisher, title, all that. Um, anyway, so once you see the API, once you visit an API, like you just type it in the URL and you see what it's giving you back, you should be able to figure out how to use that information. Because again, you're just going to get that information back somehow and you're going to have to use it. In this case, I got it back. I had to do the whole converting to JSON, then creating a books array, and then adding all of this stuff into the books array. And then for each of those items, I added it to the section here called stories. I'll try to go over this again next class, but try to make more sense. Because I know this was super confusing. I was confusing myself talking about it. So if you're lost, don't worry. We'll take as much time as we need to try to understand it. We have actually next week is our last week of class, I think. So I might use some of our lab hours for this too. Any questions? It's 9:50, so I should give you the sign out and post it already.